Do you believe there's a place in the world where faith and money merge in perfect spiritual harmony? A financial sanctuary protected by divine immunity, where earthly laws do not apply? For decades, millions of Catholics placed their trust and their donations in that idea. But what if I told you that behind the Vatican walls, in the heart of Rome, there operated one of the most sophisticated money laundering schemes in modern history? A bank that didn't just keep secrets, it turned them into gold stained with blood. The Institute for Works of Religion. The name sounds pious, almost charitable. Founded in 1942, in the middle of the Second World War, under the pontificate of Pius XII, the IOR was officially created to manage the Church's assets and bypass restrictions imposed by the Allies. But from the very beginning, something darker was taking shape in that discreet building within Vatican City. There, papal sovereignty wasn't just spiritual. It was absolute legal armor. No external court could investigate. No authority could audit. No international banking law applied. The story we were told about the Vatican Bank is simple: a pious institution managing the Church's resources for charitable works. The reality, hidden in secret archives and in bodies found hanging from bridges, is completely different, and it all began with a fascist bargain. In 1929, inside the ornate halls of the Lateran Palace in Rome, Cardinal Pietro Gasparri and Benito Mussolini signed a treaty that would forever change the nature of Vatican power. The Lateran Treaty didn't just recognize the sovereignty of the tiny Vatican state. Mussolini paid a colossal indemnity to the Holy See, the equivalent of $2 billion today. It was fascist money buying spiritual legitimacy, and that capital became the seed of the financial empire that would follow. 13 years later, while Europe burned in flames, the IOR was officially established. But it wasn't just a bank. It was a dimensional doorway between the visible world of faith and the invisible underworld of criminal capital. Thanks to sovereign immunity, the bank could operate without identifying depositors, without reporting transactions, without answering to anyone except the Pope himself. A tax haven not merely protected by law, but sanctified by religious authority. During the 1960s, in the streets of Milan and the secret rooms of the Vatican, the IOR expanded its tentacles. It acquired stakes in thousands of Italian companies and controlled 8 banks. And it was during this period that the first architect of the Shadow Empire emerged, Michele Sindona. Sicilian financier, businessman for the Cosa Nostra, intimate advisor to popes. Sindona turned the bank into a washing machine for heroin profits, flooding the streets of America. The money entered dirty in Palermo, passed through the Vatican's anonymous accounts, and came out clean in New York. But Sindona was only the beginning. The true empire would be built by an unholy alliance: an American archbishop, a Catholic banker, and a secret Masonic lodge. And the price of that alliance would be measured in corpses and vanished billions. Paul Marcinkus didn't look like a criminal. Tall, strong, with a Chicago accent, the American archbishop was the right hand of Pope Paul VI. In 1969, he became president of the IOR and turned it into something even Sindona hadn't imagined: a global nexus connecting the Sicilian Mafia, the CIA, Latin American dictatorships, and the Italian political elite, all shielded by the cassock and papal immunity. In Milan, Roberto Calvi was building his own empire at Banco Ambrosiano. A devout Catholic, Calvi was known as God's banker, but his true devotion was to the Masonic Lodge P2, a secret organization that had infiltrated the highest ranks of the Italian state. And through P2, Calvi and Marcinkus sealed their infernal pact. The mechanism was one of perverse elegance. Calvi created shell companies in Panama, Central America, and tax havens scattered across the Caribbean. These companies were nominally controlled by the IOR. Through them, Calvi took out loans from 120 banks around the world, totaling $600 million. The money was used to manipulate Ambrosiano's stock prices and to fund operations no government would ever publicly admit. In Warsaw, at the start of the 1980s, the Solidarity movement challenged the Polish communist regime. In Washington, CIA Director William Casey, a devout Catholic, saw in Pope John Paul II a perfect ally in the Cold War. And at the center of that geopolitical equation stood the Vatican Bank. Millions of dollars flowed from secret CIA accounts through Vatican embassies in Tehran, Baghdad, Damascus, and Jakarta into the hands of Polish dissidents. It was clandestine financing made holy, but the operation didn't stop in Poland. In Nicaragua, amid civil war, the Contras received funds channeled through the same networks. In Panama, dictators bought weapons with money laundered through IOR accounts. The Holy See had become the central bank of global anti-communism, and the price of that crusade was measured in blood and dirty dollars. In 1982, the House of Cards collapsed. Auditors uncovered a hole of $1,300,000,000 in Banco Ambrosiano's accounts. Calvi fled to London in desperation. And one June morning, his body was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge over the River Thames, bricks in his pockets and strangulation marks on his neck. The police called it suicide. Everyone knew it was execution. Marcinkus was never tried. Sheltered within the Vatican walls, the archbishop simply waited until the arrest warrants expired. The Holy See paid $244 million to Ambrosiano's creditors, not as an admission of guilt, but as acknowledgement of moral responsibility. It was the price of silence, the cost of keeping secrets buried. But some secrets are too heavy to stay buried. And the true cost of that corruption was only beginning to manifest in the consciences of millions of believers around the world. There's a special kind of betrayal that isn't measured in lost dollars or unpunished crimes. It's the betrayal of trust. And when that betrayal comes from those who swore to represent the divine on earth, who wear white robes and speak in the name of a millennia-old moral authority, the damage is incalculable. In 2006, Catholics around the world donated $101 million to what's known as Peter's Pence, the Pope's personal collection for charitable works. It was an act of pure faith. Ordinary people, factory workers, retired teachers, middle-class families placing their savings in the Vatican's hands. They believed they were feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, healing the sick. That's what they'd been promised from the pulpit. By 2020, that same collection had plummeted to $47 million, a 53% drop in 14 years. The fall wasn't accidental. It wasn't the result of a global economic crisis or fading religious interest. It was the exact metric of lost trust, measured in coins that no longer clinked into the wicker baskets passed down church aisles. Because the faithful discovered that their money wasn't feeding the poor. It was covering deficits created by disastrous investments, endless scandals, and corruption so deeply rooted it spanned decades. In London, a luxury building on Sloane Avenue bought for €350 million using funds diverted from Peter's Pence. The property featured penthouses, designer shops on the ground floor, and a history so filthy that the Financial Times dedicated months to investigating it. In Rome, the trial of a Cardinal Giovanni Angelo Becciu, convicted in December 2023 to 5.5 years in prison for diverting millions in charitable funds. Becciu was one of the Vatican's most powerful men, former substitute for the Secretariat of State, the equivalent of a deputy prime minister. He diverted funds to pay ransom for a kidnapped nun in Mali and invested in film productions, including Rocket Man, the Elton John biopic. And amid all this, figures like Monsignor Nunzio Scarano, nicknamed Monsignor 500, because he only carried €500 notes in his cassock, arrested in 2013, trying to smuggle €20 million from Switzerland in a private jet. Scarano worked at APSA, the administration of the Patrimony of the Apostolic See, which manages the Vatican's properties. He used IOR accounts to launder money for Italian builders and corrupt politicians. Recent popes have tried to reform the irredeemable. Benedict XVI, in 2010, created the Financial Information Authority, AIF, to monitor suspicious transactions. It was the first step toward getting the Vatican off the international blacklist. Francis, elected in 2013, was more aggressive. He shut down thousands of suspicious accounts, reduced the IOR's client base from 18,900 to 15,000, fired the entire oversight board, and brought in Ernst & Young to audit the finances. In 2013, the bank's profit plunged from €86 million to a mere €2.9 million. It was the cost of cleaning house. Closed accounts meant fewer deposits, less movement, less revenue. But it was necessary, or at least, it was supposed to be. Yet, even with these reforms, in 2023, the bank reported a profit of €34 million and didn't transfer a single cent to the Pope for charitable works. 0. The Vatican's operational deficit reached €70 million. The money existed, it just wasn't going where it should. The Financial Information Authority reported 123 suspicious transactions in 2023, and 118 of them, 96%, originated from the IOR itself. Only one was blocked. One single transaction out of 123. In 2024, the number of alerts dropped to 79%. Progress? Or simply more sophisticated criminals, more cautious, better advised by lawyers who know exactly where the oversight boundaries lie? Today, the Vatican manages €5.4 billion in assets. It has published annual transparency reports since 2015, with audited balance sheets and financial statements that look flawless on paper. It participates in international anti-money laundering bodies like the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. It receives praise from Moneyval, the Council of Europe committee responsible for evaluating anti-laundering systems. In 2021, Moneyval rated the Vatican as largely compliant in 35 of 40 international recommendations. It was hailed as a victory, but 5 still failed. And largely compliant means there are loopholes. There always are. Yet donations keep falling year after year. Trust keeps eroding like sand slipping through fingers. Because collective memory doesn't easily forget decades of sanctified corruption. Because reforms on paper don't erase Roberto Calvi hanging beneath Blackfriars Bridge. They don't resurrect Pope John Paul I, mysteriously dead after 33 days of pontificate. They don't explain the missing millions, the burned documents, the silenced witnesses. Francis Ford Coppola understood this viscerally when he made The Godfather Part 3 in 1990. There, Michael Corleone desperately tries to buy legitimacy through business, with the Vatican investing $600 million in real estate holdings controlled by the Church, only to discover that the institution is just as corrupt, just as brutal, just as merciless as the Mafia he commands. Archbishop Gilday, a character directly inspired by Paul Marcinkus, negotiates shareholdings while corpses pile up behind the scenes. The Pope is poisoned. Bankers are murdered on bridges. The film ends with Michael watching his daughter die on the steps of a theater in Palermo, a victim of a bullet meant for him, the final punishment for trying to mingle with institutions that would never accept him as an equal. It was fiction inspired by real events. And that fiction shaped the world's perception of the Church far more powerfully than any transparency report, any Ernst & Young audit, any papal statement could ever correct. Because people understand narratives, not balance sheets. And the narrative of a corrupt Vatican is etched into the collective unconscious.